Okay, so what is vision therapy? So how does it differ from other therapies? So today we're going to talk about that in particular. We're also going to talk about the key ingredients for a successful vision therapy program, how to structure successful vision therapy, and some vision therapy success stories. So I'm Tom from Eye Care Eyewear, and my goal is to bring you an evidence-based perspective to behavioural vision care so that you can better understand what it means to practice behavioural vision care. So by way of background, I've been practicing optometry since 2001, and I founded Eye Care Eyewear in 2006, and our independent practice holds over 25,000 patient records. And in 2015 I was fortunate enough to become a fellow of the Australasian College of Behavioural Optometrists. Now today I'm very excited to announce that I'm joined by Bev, so I'm just going to bring Bev in now. So Bev, you're on the screen now. Now, Bev is my long-term friend and a mentor, and she was actually one of the founding members of ACBO in 1987 with some other great optometrists, Graham Peachy, Chris Henderson, Graham Thompson, Professor Ed Howe. Bev was actually the president of ACBO from 1992 to 1996, and she also served as the first member outside of the US on the Optometric Extension Program Foundation, and later you served as their president. So Bev was also a practice owner of a large group practice called Roberts Alexander, and she continues to lecture and trains people for vision therapy. And you're actually doing that this weekend, Bev?
I am indeed.
So today's video is for anybody who's interested in learning about vision therapy from one of the most experienced, in my opinion, one of the most experienced optometrists and vision therapists in Australia. If there's any time during this talk that you have any questions about vision therapy, please don't hesitate to comment. And we'll definitely get to the meat of that now a little bit later. So what is vision therapy and how does it differ from other therapy options? Firstly, Bev, what would be your definition of vision therapy?
Well, the definition that I use when I talk to people is one where I want people to understand that the visual system to begin with is not just the ability to see small detail. This is what most of us grow up believing. However, the visual system, if we try and oversimplify it, has two components. The part that does the fine detailed seeing, which we could call central, and the peripheral visual system, which works subconsciously. Now, this peripheral system has three, if we again oversimplify, three main things that it does. It detects movement, it recognises form, and its big job is to know where things are in relation to us.
Yep.
Now, this system can get out of calibration quite easily, relatively speaking, or it maybe doesn't learn how to develop the correct calibration in some young kids. And this plays an important part in some of the visual problems we see. So that when I think about what vision therapy does, it's all about getting the central and that peripheral system working together efficiently. Mm-hmm. And it's about using that visual system to guide and direct our movements. Now, when we think about movements, it's pretty easy if we think about playing sport. But some of the movements that we guide and direct actually occur internally. So they're associated with thinking. We visualise things and we plan what our action might be. So that we've got to also get that visualisation component working well.
You know, I mean, if I was to simplify that, I would suggest that what we're talking about is they're movement-based activities, but yes, they're visually directed.
Yes.
And I would say that could be one of the ways that we could distinguish between vision therapy and other sort of therapies. What are your thoughts? How do you see vision therapy being different from, say, occupational therapy? Because there's some wonderful occupational therapists doing some great work out there.
There certainly is. And I think one of the aspects that I try and emphasise within any therapy program is that the person has to develop an understanding and a control of themselves so that they can then do the visual direction of their movement. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I think sometimes with some of the other therapies, learning how to do a movement is what they're aiming towards, but I want the person to actually think about the movement and be able to control it. Doing it quickly is not always good because sometimes we can do things ballistically or very quickly, but if we're asked to do it in a slower, controlled manner, it's much harder. I want people to be able to do both.
Yeah, definitely. Just eye movements come to mind there, like those sort of slow pursuit eye movements, moving your eyes across the page is much harder than sort of one side to the other sometimes for some patients. Yeah. Look, I just think we should quickly touch on the fact that like vision therapy, sometimes there's a perception out there that this is a new side of therapy, but it really isn't. It's vision therapy has been grounded in scientific principles for a long time. In the last decade, vision therapy has received funding from the US government, the National Eye Institute, and it's even been reviewed in like the Cochrane Review, which means it's sort of a gold standard as far as research studies. And there's one study that we can really hang our hat on, and this is this randomized clinical control of treatments for convergence insufficiency for kids, where basically they found that for children that have convergence insufficiency, vision therapy in office was more efficient than just providing pencil push-ups or placebo vision therapy. So yeah, like I really feel that this is a valid, highly beneficial treatment option that really, as optometrists, it'd be great to see us all offering.
Well, another aspect of that is that a lot of the kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, in many cases, have convergence insufficiency. So it's quite likely that part of their inability to attend is not so much an inability to attend, but a fatigue through poor control of convergence, and therefore they want to have frequent breaks and rests, which is seen as the inability to attend.
Yeah, I mean, I often find with kids with ASD that they have never really had the opportunity to be able to attend. They've never learnt that's the whole part of that disease, that problem. And so it would make sense that they would need some support of their focusing system, whether that be through some focusing support with glasses and obviously with some exercises to develop that skill.
Yep.
So you go.
Today we're seeing kids who don't get to play and understand the three-dimensional world as much. So many kids start on screens at a very young age. There's actually a report out, and I can't give you the reference to it, but I was listening to a lecture just a couple of weeks ago where they're actually doing some brain studies on kids who've been using screens under the age of 2, and they're finding that at around age 7, their brain development is well below that of kids who have not used screens at that young age. And they're also finding, another scary one they're finding is that some of the studies on brains of teenagers, you're getting exactly the same changes with the kids who become addicted to gaming as you get in heroin addicts.
Wow. Yeah, like it sort of makes sense too, because when you think about it, a visual system wasn't designed to be looking at a screen for a prolonged period of time. We're designed to
anything two-dimensional.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
before screens, we had the kids who buried themselves in books, and that was perhaps not as bad as screens, but that wasn't good developmentally either. And when we think about a visual system that's job is to direct movement, that needs to happen within a three-dimensional space.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, so I suppose the other thing I wanted to touch on was some key ingredients to a successful vision therapy program. Or another way we would describe this would be some of the barriers that you might see as well. So for you, like what do you think needs to be there for you to get some success with vision therapy?
Okay, so there's a few things that I think are important. Number one is we're not trying to train the eyes to do something. We're trying to retrain the brain how to control and organise. So as one of my mothers said to me one day when she looked at me quite quizzically and she said, this isn't really eye therapy at all. This is all brain training. And I went, absolutely. Yep. So whatever we do, we're wanting to modify the way the brain operates, organises our actions and our visual control. So one of the things that the human brain likes is novelty. So sometimes we may have to have a range of activities available at our disposal because people get tired of doing the one thing. So you need to have a number of ways of doing the same thing, and sometimes you change to a new activity just to help with that novelty factor. Another one of the studies that came out, I think it was in an educational journal earlier this century, was that for good learning to occur, something needs to be repeated 24 hours apart for at least 7 to 14 times before the action is learned. This is something that clinically vision therapy has been doing for decades prior to that, but now there is actually research that says for good learning to occur, regular practice is important. And so I think that's something that I try to get across to anybody who's going to come in and work on therapy. That yes, regular practice. Now, the other thing to make it work there is a list of ideals. What are the ideals? Well, you should do it at the same time of the day. You should do it in the morning. You should spend the same amount of time. And yes, those are ideals, but life is very busy today. So I tend to be a little bit more flexible, and I say anything is better than nothing.
Yep.
And doing it at different times of the day is fine, but just remember that sometimes if you're doing an activity in the afternoon or the evening, you may be seeing the performance as a tired performance. And if you compare that with the way it's done in the morning, it will be different. Just don't be too hard if you're working with a child, don't be too hard on the child. If you're working as an adult person in therapy, don't be too hard on yourself. Accept the fact that it's better to still be doing it when you're tired than not doing it at all, but don't have the same expectation of the result.
Yeah, you mentioned at the start that it's important to have that the brain in this brain training effectively. So when you think about the times when it's best for your brain to perform, that's the times when you're well fed, haven't had a sugar high, or maybe you're not. It's like morning times. It will be a time when you might be able to concentrate a little bit better for some kids compared to the end of the day.
And morning time is absolutely the best time if you can arrange it, but not all families can. There's work commitments, there's other kids, there's band practice, and we've got to fit everything in. So sometimes we just have to be realistic and say, okay, we'll take it at a less preferred time just so that we can still get that regular practice.
Now, what about motivation as a key ingredient for success too? Because I feel that, like, sometimes I have patients that come in that are really motivated because they've got a problem and they want to get it sorted out, and I find that works really well. Whereas sometimes it might be, say, for instance, a parent that's highly motivated to have vision therapy, and in some cases that might not work so well as far as the outcome of the success of the program.
One of the things that I try to do with every patient that I see, and particularly make a fuss of it with the kids, is that I'm talking about the fact that I want them to be in control of what they're doing. So if I've got a parent who's the assistant, I say to the parents, you need to take off your parent hat. Parents like to help. And when a parent helps, they'll tell the kid how to do something. Move your arm this way, move your leg this way, do this, do that. What I want instead is I want the parent to take the time to say, well, how did you do that? Did you move the right arm? Did you move it slow? Did you move it fast? So what you're doing is you're actually giving ownership of the task to the child. And as I say to the parents, it means that it's much slower, and if you have limited time, you'll get frustrated because you think you need to do it 25 times. But if you do it 3 times with the child in control, you're going to get more benefit than doing 25 times with you in control. So it's also part of bringing that attentional component in, and the attentional component is giving the kid ownership.
Yep.
And when they come in to see me, very often I'll talk about what they did for homework. I'll ask the kid, I give them a diary and ask them to write some notes as well, but I'll say to the child, okay, how did you do on this activity? Is it hard? Is it easy? And sometimes I'll even say to some of them, well, you tell me it's getting easy, so if it's getting easy, are you doing it so well that I shouldn't even bother checking how you're doing it today? So again, I'm allowing them to have a say in what we do and how we do it. And very often what's amazing to me is they'll say, oh yeah, I'm doing it really well. And I'll say, okay, so do you think I need to check it? Oh, yeah, you better.
I think that providing because we're talking about children generally, but there's obviously adults that will do vision therapy too, but having the ownership of their therapy program is really, really important. And one of the things that you taught me, which I really appreciate, was at the end of the homework diary, we have a question where we ask, how do you feel vision therapy has, what benefits have you had with vision therapy this week? And there's a whole opportunity for that person to sort of say, well, I think this has changed. And it's just that self-reflection and for them to take ownership of the changes that they're making that I think is one of the motivating factors.
And that is, and I think that's a really important part of motivation. Now, again, if you're working with younger kids, you go through the whole gamut of whatever bribery works at the time.
Yep.
Sometimes sticker charts work. I mean, I work in the office I use stickers too, and at the end of a therapy program, I'll say to the kids, okay, tell me the activities you did today. What they don't realise is that that's actually another activity. That's them having to think back over what they did, so it's bringing a visual memory component in, and they earn a sticker for every one they can tell me about. And it's amazing how some of them can't remember what they've done in the last half an hour, so they don't get stickers for the ones they don't remember. Mind you, if they do particularly well at thinking, because it's usually thinking that they get this for. They get bonus stickers when they work something out for themselves. And we make a great fuss about how I really can't afford these bonus stickers anymore, and how terrible, I'm going to have to pay another one.
Which adds value to them.
It's more bribery and corruption. Works very well though.
Do you find so what the sticker is sort of really what I describe as like a short-term sort of extrinsic sort of reward. What about these sort of long-term ones? Like I'm going to give an example. Like I had a child that did some vision therapy, and he got a motorbike at the end of his program. And we'll talk about it a little bit more because he's one of my success stories at the end. But I mean, it's a pretty big reward. What are your thoughts about those sort of big rewards compared to the smaller rewards, and how that works for some kids and not for others?
I think some of those bigger type rewards probably work very well, particularly with maybe the older primary teenage kids. I think I remember that boy because I think I might have worked with him when I was working for you. I think, yes, look, sometimes, a go to the movies or something that they've wanted. I mean, it's like some kids, can save pocket money towards buying something that they really want for themselves. Sometimes I think, the bribery might be, well, if you work very well at your therapy program, we'll contribute something towards something that you wanted. Sometimes the bribery can be sort of negative or positive for the kid. You might get a little bit more screen time this week if you do all your homework. But you've got to watch that one.
We'll call it incentivise as opposed to bribery. But I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
The other thing too is so sometimes, as far as the skill of a therapist, I think it's really important, obviously, to be able to create that motivation in the therapy room as well. And one of the things that I find is that, I often sort of have this in my subconsciously, this sort of 80-20 type rule. So when I set an activity for a child, I might try and I'm aiming for them to be able to achieve that 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time they won't achieve it. And I feel that there's sort of a bit of a sweet spot for some kids that needs to be adjusted and played with. But generally, we want them to succeed more than they fail. What are your thoughts about that?
Yep, absolutely. And that's the kind of time too where you've got to read your patient. And this is just the same with adults as well as kids. Remember we said before that novelty is important. And adults get bored with doing the same thing again and again. I mean, sometimes I will say, particularly with some of my iTurn patients, when we're getting towards the end of an iTurn therapy program, a strabismus program, look, I'm sorry, but we're down to the point where I'm going to give you the same activity, and you're probably going to be doing the same activity for weeks, but we're going to be changing it in that the distance that you're going to be working from the target is going to change, and the strength, if we're doing something with, say, a prism or a lens, the power of the prism or the lens that I give you to use is going to change. So the target and the idea will stay the same, but we're going to modify it by doing these other things. And each time we change it, you can feel fairly excited about yourself because that means you've achieved another level. So again, it's part of that you getting excited to help provide the motivation. And I think if you can become just as involved in their excitement and their achievements, that I think too is another motivator.
Yeah, no, it's I definitely find that oftentimes there'll be an exercise which I think is highly valuable for that particular patient, and if I can get the patient to be really enthused with it, then we might actually run with it for the whole program. But where I find you can make the difference is with these loadings. And sometimes, so loadings would be, I would describe it as extra challenges, usually mentally related challenges, which are trying to move the activity from a cognitive, you need to think about it, into a you can do it automatically type state. And oftentimes the loadings I find are the things that are actually highly beneficial. Like for instance, you might have an activity where any vision therapy activity where you ask the person to march with one foot and then the other foot, then one foot and the other foot, and just it's the simple march from one spot to the other is throwing the patient's balance off. It means they've got to recalibrate in terms of their fixation. It also working on those the bilateral integration of being able to move one foot and the other foot while concentrating on something else.
Absolutely, yeah. So yes, all those kind of loadings. The trick with the loadings is you don't want to bring them in too early. You've got to have back to your 80%. You want someone to be able to achieve at 80% before you add an extra level of something in there. Because if you put the loading in at too high a level, then it becomes, and the typical word that lots of children will use is the word boring.
Yep.
If it's too hard, it's boring. If it's too easy, it's boring.
Yep.
And so you're the trick of being the good bartender, if you like, and making the perfect martini as the therapist is to know when you've got to add just that extra little bit of something.
Make it a little bit harder.
To make it a bit trickier. Or you've also got to read it and say, hey, look, this one's obviously struggling. I've got to get some of the pressure off here, or this kid's just going to switch off and not going to have anything to do with it. So, yes, the real challenge, I guess, for a therapist is to be able to make the too difficult doable and the too easy challenging.
So this sort of leads a little bit, I suppose, into the structure of a vision therapy program and how to maximise success. So as we sort of touched on, that particular study mentioned that it's an in-office once a week with some homework exercises as well. And that's sort of how, obviously being evidence-based, that's how we sort of structure a vision therapy program. But do you feel that there's some flexibility around that in terms of the success that you've had with vision therapy structure compared to?
Yeah, I think you can make it... I think you can make fortnightly therapy in-office visits.
Mm-hmm.
I have not been able to make it successful particularly well if you don't have good contact points at least that frequently. Yep. The reason you need it that frequently is because if it's monthly visits, it's so easy when they get home to get busy and think, oh, I'll start tomorrow, and suddenly the month's gone by. Where if it's 7 days or 14 days, then you've got that limited time. I've got to start now because there's not enough time to put it off.
Yeah.
So personally, I find that weekly or fortnightly can work, typically I've worked in a situation where I've done a half an hour therapy visit in the office. I actually like a bit longer than that. I tend to work for 45 minutes these days because that gives you that extra bit of discussion time to talk about what's been done at home and also maybe to give some extra notes on what should be done at home in the ensuing time until you're going to see them next. And you've still got a reasonable amount of time to do some work. What I then do in office is I will make sure the activities that I'm going to send home are part of my therapy session in office today, but I have also some activities that are more technology based, which again, it's part of that novelty thing. It's something different, or a couple of activities that I might have that work on judging space. So for the optometrists, around things like yoke prism activities, which I don't send home, but they're usually enjoyed by the kids and they're very, very positive. And so those are specifically office activities and they don't go to home activities.
So in summary, a lot of the vision therapy that you'll do in the office will form the core of a vision therapy program for home, but every now and again you might include some other sort of more fun type activities.
Everyone I would include some other things.
Yeah, something that's a little bit different, maybe that could be used as more of an incentive and often involves a free space based activity or potentially some sort of technology as well.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, let's touch on some success stories. You first, Bev. Tell me. I mean, obviously, there's so many, but let's just touch on a couple that you can think back of, and you were happy to see.
So often when people come into you, they come in talking about sort of like an eye problem, and one success story that has stayed with me for a long, long time was a lady that I worked with probably going up 20 years ago now. And, gosh, isn't it terrible to say 20 years ago? And she was in her 70s, and she came in because she was seeing double. And we actually started doing vision therapy with her. And the therapy that we were doing was essentially, as I said to you earlier, recalibrating the balance between the peripheral system and the central. We really didn't get into doing a lot of what you might typically think of as eye exercises for someone who sees double. And her double vision went away as we got her all recalibrated. But the fascinating thing was that the thing she came in so excited to tell me about was, I can drive confidently now. And I'm sort of thinking, glory be, what was it like before?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting my jobs around the house done much quicker and easier. I'm just not as tired at the end of the day. And none of these were on her list of concerns when she initially came in. So that happens often.
Because usually you will ask a patient their goals. I think that's we probably didn't mention that before, but having a clear set of goals that the patient or the patient's carer has written down is really important for me, because but then as you've just explained, like sometimes there's all these other side benefits that happen with vision therapy, which is just amazing. The one about the motorbike, I think, was a great one, because that child did, from memory, 3 programs of vision therapy, and the motivation was, honestly, he was probably going to get a motorbike anyway at the end of his 3 programs, because he lived on a farm. But it wasn't just the motorbike that he was keen on as his goal. His goal was to be able to be more confident, so that he could actually ride his motorbike. And I think that's where the vision therapy helped him. Obviously, he got a motorbike, but also he had the confidence to be able to ride it. So I think that was one of the things that really stood out to me.
When you think about riding a motorbike, or like my lady driving a car, when you're in that situation, everything is moving. And so you have to be able to make quick, accurate judgments about where things are in relation to you or your car or your motorbike, because that's what you're controlling. And if you're not making quick, accurate judgments, a lot of the time you'll get by. But if something unexpected happens, that's when you're likely to have an accident. So that's what vision therapy gives you, the ability to make these fast, accurate judgments about the relationship of things that are happening around you, particularly in a moving world.
And that's why vision therapy has been used for all sorts of improving sporting performance as well, which is another whole sort of area which we, to be honest, it's not something that I do a lot of out here in Dalby and Chinchilla, but definitely it's an area that vision therapy will help. What about for vision-related learning problems too? Like, have you had any wonderful success stories you can share with us?
Well, one of the things that you find quite often in kids who you don't hear it as a symptom for the young kids, because they're not at this stage yet, but the perhaps 9, 10-year-olds up. Often you can talk to them about how well they read and understand what they read. And so reading comprehension is very frequently a symptom that's related to some of maybe convergence problems, or maybe eye movement skill problems, or maybe focus control problems, or the whole, or all 3. And once you are able to get the visual system working more efficiently, frequently that's what the improvement is. And so you kids that are, instead of having to read everything 3 times before they do an assignment to make sense of the research material they're reading, they only have to read it once, or maybe read some parts of it a second time. So they're quicker at getting the job done, takes less effort, and they get less frustrated. So, some of the symptoms that disappear after vision therapy are often frustration and tired and cranky. Which is really good. But you mentioned also the confidence thing. In fact, with most kids that I do therapy with, the first change that you might see in, I'm going to use the word behaviour, meaning not good or bad, but meaning the way they do things, is a change in self-confidence. And that will often come after maybe 6 weeks of therapy or thereabouts. And so that's what parents say, he's just so much more confident. And that's partly, I think, because we're getting him to do that self-assessment, that self-control, that self-organisation, and I'm learning to trust myself.
What about so as far as like the actual structure, so we talked about weekly visits, and do you tend to sort of try and break it down into programs, or would you sort of just keep rolling until you feel like you've...
No, I actually work 8 sessions, which I call it a unit of therapy. And I will do an optometrist review visit either every 8 or every 16 sessions. So sometimes it's patently obvious as you get towards session number 8 that we're not done. But I will always do a review after 16 sessions of therapy.
Yeah, and obviously that's how I structure mine too, because you taught me. But I think that's wonderful too, because often I will do some assessments. I'll checking to see how well the eyes are working together, the focusing skills, and that's where you see some big improvements on paper, which sort of supports the improvements that the child or the vision therapy participant is talking about as well. Look, Bev,
Often what you find though is that you'll get the changes in the way they do things, and there'll be a relief of the symptoms that they came in with quicker than I will measure the numbers change when I sit them in the consulting room chair, which is why it does take that little bit longer. So, very typically I'm looking at 16 sessions of therapy for probably the majority of people that I see. Some are longer. Rarely is it much less than that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty accurate. I would say that you get some major gains in that first 8 weeks, and then you get some maybe slightly lesser gains, but still some good gains in the second week. And the third one's just more about reinforcing, isn't it? So that's sort of how I look at it. But usually 3 programs of 8 weeks would be about the maximum. And let's face it, by that stage we're probably all sick of each other, and it's time potentially the patients to go and see somebody else. So you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things that therapy, I feel, works better in that sort of intensive type model.
Yeah. I mean, with some of the eye turns and things that I've seen, the younger ones, we've worked for maybe only 16 sessions, and then they've gone away for 6 months, not cured, but we've started to make changes, and then they've come back. And with more maturity, they can take more of that mental control and start to be able to be aware of what they're doing more.
Yep. Look, Bev, I want to really thank you for this tonight. I sort of put you on the spot a little bit, but I think it's wonderful that you've helped me out here, and I just think it's important everybody knows that Bev currently has, like, I describe it as a boutique vision therapy practice, which is from her house in Launton. And so, like, what would be the best way for people to contact you for those particular services, Bev?
Well, they can either email or telephone me.
Yep. The way that you'll find Bev in particular is if you go to the ACBO website and you do search for a practitioner, and I've got Bev's details up the top of the screen here. And so she's more than happy to help with some vision therapy. And I think also for optometrists that, say, for instance, that can now appreciate the importance of vision therapy, but they're not prepared to maybe or have the space to be able to offer it, then it's nice to know there's sort of a tertiary referral option in Northside Brisbane. Very good. Well, I'm going to thank our audience as well. So thank everybody for watching. And if there's any comments, please leave them down below. And we'll sign off now. And yeah, thank you, Bev. I really appreciate this chat. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.